Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight,
I am asking Congress to amend this bill.
our Spotlight Politics team examines President Trump's unexpected criticism of the COVID relief bill and what comes next.
It's concerning for the region because local governments, businesses, we all make decisions based on this data.
Illinois is one of the rare states to see its population fall. Why is that?
I can't think of a more vulnerable population.
Dozens of advocacy groups say prisons and jails should be some of the first places to get the COVID vaccine.
Try to remain optimistic, but then you have to be realistic too.
How some businesses and residents in South Shore are recovering from this summer's civil unrest and the pandemic. The challenges high school students may be facing while applying for college during a pandemic.
At this point, we need everyone anyway, so it doesn't matter who we're playing or what the other team's record is.
Playoffs are still in reach. Coming off a win against the Vikings, can the Bears beat the dismal Jacksonville Jaguars?
See how frustrating it is for him to get you to understand why he's doing the thing we begged him to do for 4 years now?
And a new book dives into the importance and evolution of political satire, from ancient graffiti to late-night TV talk shows. But first, some of today's top stories. Governor J.B. Pritzker announces that more than 100,000 Illinois residents have gotten their initial dose of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine.
That's more than any other state in the nation so far. That's a product of the hard work and deliberate process of Illinois' IDPH and IEMA vaccine distribution team, our state's local public health departments, the Illinois Health and Hospital Association, and the amazing staff on the ground maximizing efficiency and minimizing waste.
And Illinois is set to get more than 23,000 doses of Pfizer's vaccine, while Chicago will get an additional 15,000 this week. In addition, the second vaccine approved by federal authorities from Moderna will arrive in Chicago and Illinois next week, according to the governor. And one of those vaccinated Chicagoans is the head of the Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago, Cardinal Blaise Cupich. He received the first dose today at St. Anthony Hospital. Cardinal Cupich says he wanted to get his shot in public to combat any vaccine hesitancy that Chicagoans might be having.
We want to make sure that people are encouraged to become vaccinated, but also to have confidence in it and to realize that being vaccinated, as the Holy Father has told us, is an opportunity for us to be supportive of the common good.
And Illinois health officials report more than 6,700 new cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. Officials also announced an additional 135 deaths. That brings the total number of cases in Illinois to more than 918,000, and the death toll right now is at 15,547. 4 parents of Illinois high school athletes are suing Governor J.B. Pritzker and the Illinois High School Association over the cancellation of the winter sports season. Pritzker and the Illinois Department of Public Health put basketball and other high and medium risk sports on hold, saying they won't be played until at least the spring. The suit claims the cancellation is an unconstitutional violation of the plaintiff's right to equal protection under Illinois' state constitution. Several lawsuits have been filed against Pritzker over COVID restrictions with little success thus far. We'll have more on this story later in the program. More people have left Illinois in the past year, according to new data out from the U.S. Census Bureau. That puts Illinois in a position unlike most other states, including many of our neighbors. Our Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Paris, sometimes it's good to be original, an oddball, the exception to the rule. Not in this case.
And the issue is that Illinois is one of only 2 states that's losing population. And even some of our neighboring states that are other Midwestern states and other, post-industrial states like Michigan, they have more stable populations than Illinois does. Minnesota had a big jump in population, apparently. Michigan, a little bit of an increase. Indiana, Wisconsin, et cetera. So, unfortunately, Illinois is an outlier in this. You don't want to lose population if you're the only one doing it.
Just released data, it estimates that Illinois' population is about 12.6 million people. That is a decrease from last year of about 79.5 thousand people and a loss of nearly 250,000 residents in the past decade. That's like losing Illinois' second largest city, Aurora, plus a community the size of Wheaton or Oak Lawn. Demographer Rob Hurl says Chicago and the color counties are not to blame. He says from Lake to Will to DeKalb counties, well, they're growing, not by a lot, but at least something. But outside of the Chicago metropolitan area, it's by and large declines.
So what's driving the Illinois population decline is not Metro Chicago per se. It's the rest of the state. When you map it out, it's just one county after another. Some of the counties are these what we might call post-industrial counties. It's Macon County, where Decatur is. It's where Rockford is in Winnebago County. It's Rock Island County. They have never recovered their population from the days of industrialization.
Still, these trends are worrisome to the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, Aaron Alleman.
Illinois has really been in a prolonged period of slow growth since 2001. Our numbers have gone down. And, slowing population means that our economic growth is slower, and continued population continues to be a worrisome trend. And so one of the things that we want to do is make sure that as we think about the future, that we're thinking about putting in place the types of workforce opportunities. Because while I'd love to say it's the winter weather that drives people away, I think a bigger driver is the types of jobs that are available here and the economic opportunity for everyone.
Everyone, as in considering both who is underemployed and unemployed, and she points out the higher unemployment rate for African Americans. She says fixing that means being intentional about creating career pipelines. So not just looking at jobs in the service industry, also looking at long-term opportunities like in the biotech and biomedical fields. And with the economy now battered by COVID, she says the Chicago metropolitan region needs to be proactive about getting businesses back on their feet.
For this area specifically, we know we've seen some growth in the high income wage earners across the region, but it isn't enough to make up for the low income wage earners. So again, it's really finding ways to make sure that we're not just attracting one certain type of workforce, but that we're diversifying our workforce. And I think that's one of the opportunities that this region has, right? We aren't a Silicon Valley, we don't only build one type of thing here. We have this broad multimodal sector here.
Now, asked about population losses today, Governor J.B. Pritzker laid those population losses over the past decade at the feet of his predecessor.
Under Governor Bruce Rauner was I think people had lost faith in state government. They had lost faith in things getting done in Illinois. And we've been working very hard to reverse that image for Illinois.
Now, it is worth pointing out that these population estimates are those that are put out annually by the U.S. Census Bureau. The data is not that is a result of the recently completed once-in-a-decade major census effort. And Illinois actually did well with its efforts to encourage participation in that, surpassing the response rate from 2010 and coming in with the 7th highest response rate overall in the nation. Only when the census figures are out is when Illinois will learn really more about what's behind some of these population losses, including whether the state is going to lose 1 or 2 seats in Congress. Now, meanwhile, that demographer that we spoke with says that the continued population decrescendo, maybe it's time for Illinois to consider diving deeper into what is behind those trends.
In Illinois, if we really care about this problem, maybe it's time to stop all of us kind of wondering and taking a stab at it. And it may be time for the state to really bring some scientists into this problem and commission some real serious research into, why are people leaving? What are the factors? And then most importantly, how can we turn it around? I think that's where we're at.
Now, as we're going to talk about soon, Paris in Spotlight, clearly President Donald Trump has been quite busy in his waning days in the White House, and including in that a lot of unknowns about how the Trump administration is going to handle the census as his term comes to a close. But the expectation is that the president is to get census information to governors, including Illinois' Pritzker, by mid-January. Back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Initial rounds of the COVID vaccine should be delivered to prisons and jails for inmates and detainees, as well as the staffs working there. That's the message from more than 60 community and advocacy groups. A letter sent to the Illinois Department of Public Health on Monday asked the state to update phase 1 of its rollout plan to include incarcerated individuals. This comes as incarcerated people are 4 times as likely to become infected than the general population and twice as likely to die. That's according to a study by the National Commission on COVID-19 and Criminal Justice. Joining us to talk about the coronavirus impact on jails and prisons and the vaccine's rollout are Jennifer Vollen-Katz, Executive Director of the John Howard Association, and Charlene Grace, Executive Director of Chicago Community Bond Fund. We invited the Illinois Department of Corrections to join this conversation, but they told us no one was available. We do thank both of you for being here. First, Jenny, with you. A lot of our viewers might not have prisons on the list of places where initial rounds of the vaccine should go. What is the case you want to make to them?
You know, I think it's pretty clear that prisons are pretty much the most dangerous place you can be during COVID-19. And, you know, we talk a lot about congregant settings, but we typically talk about them in terms of senior care. And the reality is life inside our prisons is far more dangerous than it is at facilities like that. The lack of ability to social distance, lack of access to PPE, enforcement of mask wearing protocols being harder to come by. There's just all sorts of factors that make life inside our prisons the most dangerous place right now, making those people the most vulnerable and in need of the vaccine.
And let's dig a little more into those numbers that we mentioned at the top. In Illinois, nearly 7,000 incarcerated people have contracted the coronavirus to date. Roughly 1,700 of those currently have the virus. Meanwhile, 3,200 staff members have tested positive for COVID-19 as well. 405 of those currently have the virus. Charlene, you know, what is the situation right now, Cook County Jail and at facilities throughout the Illinois Department of Corrections in terms of their ability to contain the virus?
Sure. So first, I want to emphasize that with county jails, we're dealing with 92 different jails in 92 different counties run by 92 different sheriffs. And so that's a very different system than the Illinois Department of Corrections, in which the prisons are being managed by a single entity, the Illinois Department of Corrections. And it also means that the jails that many people are in, aside from Cook County Jail and a few others, are very small. They may not have any health care access inside. They don't have the same sort of resources. And what they do have is people who are there predominantly for short stays. So people who are being admitted and being released on a frequent basis. And that means that there's a very high risk of COVID entering county jails because of that turnover.
And Jenny, you know, when you have these COVID hotspots in jails and prisons, it's not just contained to there, it does spill out into the community. So tell us how it impacts the communities surrounding these facilities.
Absolutely. You know, I think we've all learned by now that COVID knows, you know, no barrier. And so when you've got these hotspots, you've got staff that come and go from the facilities, while the incarcerated people, you know, unfortunately don't have visitors and don't have programming, and a lot of the movement in and out has been stopped due to COVID precautions. Some of it has not, and that's the staff. They're not quarantined in the facilities. They don't stay there. They come and go, and they're in their communities. They're at home with their families and loved ones. They're going to grocery stores and gas stations and all of the things that, you know, the rest of us are doing in order to keep our lives on track and moving forward. So, you know, you've also got people that do leave, occasionally incarcerated people, to go to the hospital and are in contact with other people there and then coming back in. So, you know, prisons are part of a community. The people that work there, the vendors that bring things in and out, you know, they do not exist in a vacuum. They are part of our communities, and we need to treat them as if they're part of our communities.
You mentioned a lot of places, a lot of facilities not having medical treatment. Cook County Jail does have medical treatment, and this afternoon we spoke with Dr. Connie Minella, who is the medical director at Cook County Jail. Here's what she said about the need for access to the vaccine.
when one cannot control their environment, the responsibility falls even stronger on those that are responsible for caring for them. And, we feel very strongly about that we need to advocate for our patients. We have to be their voice. They're in a situation where congregate settings, as we all know, COVID takes advantage of.
So, Charlene, both of you are advocating for this population. You sent this letter to Illinois officials. Have you gotten any feedback on what their plans are?
We haven't received a response yet, but I do want to say, we thank Dr. Manella for her leadership and for emphasizing that not just staff, but also incarcerated people should be getting access to the vaccine as quickly as possible. And I will say that Illinois Department of Public Health's own vaccine rollout plan lists incarcerated people as a particularly vulnerable group that should be given priority access. But what they don't do in that plan, and what our letter is asking for, is specify when incarcerated people will actually be given access to the vaccine. And some of the content of the plan suggests that it could be as late as phase 3. And we want to see incarcerated people and staff in jails, prisons, locked treatment centers, or any other sort of state-run facility where people don't have control over their own environments or the ability to social distance. They should be in phase 1.
And I assume that some of this depends on the CDC guidelines for who can receive the vaccine in these different phases. You mentioned phase 1, which we're in right now. Phase 3 is presumably several months down the road. Jennifer Vollen-Katz, how do you think the vaccine rollout will be administered in jails and prisons?
It's hard to predict. I'm really heartened by the clip we just heard. For the medical director of the Cook County Jail to be advocating for her patients to be high on the priority list is incredibly encouraging. And as Charlene pointed out, we know that people who are incarcerated are being considered a priority population. We just don't know exactly where on the priority list they fall. And it's really important that they be moved to a very high priority spot. There is no place more dangerous than these facilities to be during COVID, and we need to protect all of the people who live and who work inside these facilities.
And Charlene Grace, we know that COVID has disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities. Those also happen to be the communities that disproportionately make up the jail and prison population, at least in Chicago, in the surrounding area. How have those two factors coincided to cause this issue in jails and prisons?
Well, one of the points that over 60 organizations that signed this letter earlier in the week made is that racial equity requires a prioritization of incarcerated people, because we know that the virus is already disproportionately harming Black and Latino communities, who are also disproportionately represented in jails and prisons. And also among people who are in jail and prison, there's a higher rate of existing medical conditions that make people more likely to have severe cases of COVID-19 and more likely to die if they contract COVID-19. So for all of those reasons, equity concerns mandate that incarcerated people are as high up on the list as possible.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Our thanks to Jennifer Vollen-Katz and Charlene Grace. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And up next, a look at how businesses in the South Shore neighborhood are recovering following this summer's unrest. So please stick around.
We can get past the idea of turning this into a political topic and really get to serving our communities. That's something I can get behind.
Maybe we can use this as a calling card to unite.
This month, WTTW News is following up with neighborhoods across Chicago where civil unrest occurred this summer, including some instances of looting and property damage. Our next stop is South Shore, a Southside community nestled up against Lake Michigan. Its main commercial corridor on 71st Street experienced extensive damage and theft in late May and in early June. 6 months later, Chicago Tonight's Quinn Myers checked in with business owners and community leaders who are looking ahead to 2021, hoping that neighborhood will benefit from some long-awaited investment.
For tobacco shop owner Renee White, it's still difficult to talk about this summer's civil unrest.
I get real emotional on that one. It was very devastating to all of us.
WTTW News first met White in June, when the store she owns with her two sisters on 71st Street, selling not just tobacco products, but a little bit of everything, had been broken into and virtually cleaned out. White says they lost around $80,000 between damages and stolen goods, and seriously considered calling it quits.
We discussed it with my sisters. They were more adamant about not opening. I was the one kind of teeter-totter on the fence, although there was a lot of anger, stemming from this incident. But we managed to come to a consensus, and we just opened back up.
White's store was one of many in South Shore that experienced extensive damage and inventory loss this summer. But one business that was mostly spared was Local Market, which opened in 2019 after a years-long campaign to bring a grocery store to the neighborhood.
We couldn't save the entire mall, but the community really felt like their biggest investment of their time and money was the grocery store, Local Market.
Val Free is executive director of the Neighborhood Network Alliance, a community engagement group based in South Shore. In the immediate aftermath of this summer's unrest, her group and others gathered outside Local Market to make sure the store they had fought to open stayed that way.
Because we had people out here cleaning up, and we also had people out here saying, hey, your grandmother might need to go to the store, talking them out of it, right?
Most of the businesses here on 71st Street have bounced back from this summer's civil unrest, and neighborhood officials say they're optimistic new investment dollars and development could be on the way.
South Shore is also one of the 10 communities participating in the Invest Southwest program, which is sponsored by the City of Chicago. So we're looking forward to those investments, and we're also looking for capital improvement projects such as the Obama Presidential Center, which is coming less than a mile away.
And the South Shore Chamber of Commerce says they've helped distribute $1.6 million in grants and loans to the community this year. Money they say has helped sustain the neighborhood's small businesses during both the pandemic and civil unrest.
Did they need to pay salaries? Did they need to make repairs? Many of them were trying to retrofit their storefronts because of the pandemic. And in the midst of all this, we get civil unrest. So it was very emotional.
Near Local Market at 71st Street and Jeffrey Boulevard is M&R Prescription Center, a pharmacy which also sells medical supplies. As an essential business, owner Pamela Jones and her staff have been on the front lines of the pandemic in South Shore, even as the store sustained minor damage and theft this summer.
We've lost a couple of patients to COVID. We've had a lot of patients come in where they've lost family members because of COVID.
For Jones, the events of 2020, on top of the ongoing challenges of running a small business, have led her to question her future in the neighborhood.
South Shore is a vibrant community. It's in a beautiful location, but it has been a little bit neglected. The resources are starting to come in slowly, but there are still a lot of issues that need to be addressed below the surface. As I mentioned, the redlining that is here. It's one of those things where you, like as I mentioned before, you try to remain optimistic, but then you have to be realistic too.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Quinn Myers.
The South Shore Chamber and the Neighborhood Network Alliance are collaborating with other groups on a quality of life plan for South Shore, addressing economic development, housing, public safety, and more. They're encouraging community residents to get involved. You can learn more about that effort on our website, WTTW.com/news. The Bears have won 2 in a row after beating the Minnesota Vikings 33-27. This Sunday, the Bears are set to face off against the 1-win Jacksonville Jaguars. Can the Bears keep up this unlikely but still possible push for the playoffs? Joining us now with his take is former Chicago Bears offensive lineman James Big Cat Williams. Big Cat, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Great to see you, as always. 2 games in a row here, 3 games in a row where they've scored 30 points or more on offense. What are the keys to this turnaround so far?
Well, first, happy holidays to you too, Bears. It's what we've been asking for. The Bears have been running the ball. They've revamped that offensive line. They've made a few moves, putting Mustapher to center, moving Bars to guard, moving Whitehair to guard, and moving Affetti out to tackle. And it has paid dividends. You have a group out there right now that is communicating well with each other, and they're getting the job done. They're moving people off the ball, and they're giving Mitch protection when he needs to be protected.
And the other factor here is David Montgomery, the second-round draft pick from, or maybe it was third round from a year ago. He's been running unbelievably, 142 yards, I think 146 yards on 32 attempts last week. How important is he to get this offense going?
Oh, he's very important for what they're doing right now. Right now, you see him running the stretch plays. You see him running the ball and being effective with it. And off of that, they're bootlegging Mitch. They're able to get him out of the pocket. They're able to give the defense some different looks that work well with what Mitch is able to do well. And it's all coming together and, looking like what, it's not what Nagy wanted as far as an offense, as far as that high-flying, guys running all over the field, but it is very productive with what personnel they have.
And it's clear watching Trubisky for 4 years, he works when they tailor the offense to his skills. They have a good offensive line. They run the ball, and he can boot, and he can play action. It doesn't work when they don't do those things, so I'm going to put you on the spot. Say you're the general manager. Do you bring Mitch Trubisky back next year for like a 1-year franchise tag or a transition tag?
Well, I think one thing that goes into it is we have to look at who they've played so far. They lost to Detroit. They were able to beat Houston. They've got a Jacksonville team coming in that is 1-13. So these are teams that they should be able to beat, and this gives that offense a chance to hone what it is doing. But until we see this offense up against a team that is ranked in the top 20, which we won't see for, maybe if they make the playoffs or into next season, we don't know really what they have. But I think it looks a lot better. It's working a lot better than we anticipated as far as the way they were going to call things. They've called things that match the personnel that they have. And, can you bring Mitch back on a 1-year deal? Yeah, you can if you're going to run this type of offense. But if you're going to try and go back to the Kansas City style high-flying offense, it's not going to work. And I think they've already proved it.
So a lot of things still up in the air. You mentioned the Jaguars are 1-13. On paper, the Bears should have an easy time here, but what are the keys to beating this team?
Well, every week you hear teams and coaches talk about, we're in the moment. We're here for this one game. We're not looking into the future. But how hard is it for the Bears not to look into the future right now? They know if they win the next 2 games, and one of the next 2 games is the Packers, they have an opportunity to make the playoffs. Now, they still need some other things to work out for them, like an Arizona loss would help. But, you kind of can't help but looking down the road a little bit. And I don't think they can overlook a Jacksonville team. You saw what happened to the Rams, and you saw what happened to the Steelers overlooking the Bengals and the Jets. So, the Bears have a blueprint in front of them. They just have to follow.
Yeah, right. You're right. The Jets, a winless team, beat the Los Angeles Rams. You mentioned, things are still up in the air. We just don't really know what we have. Have Matt Nagy, head coach, Ryan Pace, has this winning streak protected their jobs, at least for the next year?
I don't know how much they were in jeopardy, but this definitely makes things look a little sweeter, makes things look a little better. You definitely need to win these 2 games. The offense needs to continue to be productive, and the defense needs to continue to step up, and the team needs to show, continue to show that they are all together, that they are following Nagy and they believe in him and what he can do.
Big Cat, we mentioned earlier in the program on another topic, there's some lawsuits against the IHSA canceling winter sports. Governor Pritzker has said that the high contact sports are not safe right now. As a high school football coach, what's your take on the continued sort of postponement of a lot of these sports in high school?
Well, it's a little hard for me because I understand being a parent and I understand watching the kids be cooped up in the house and, being able to see where other high schools and other areas have gone out and have played. But, I also understand the health risk of it all and, wanting the kids to be safe, not knowing how this could affect them in the future or if it even will affect them in the future if they do catch this virus. So, I understand both sides of the story, but, I would have liked to have seen football played. You saw so many different high schools go out there and be able to be productive, be able to have their rules in place that help keep them safe. It would have been nice to be able to get that done here.
And it seems like there might be a chance in the spring should this vaccination go okay. Big Cat, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us.
Thanks, Paris. Have happy holidays.
You too. You as well. Great to see you. We'll see you next week.
Yep.
And join us next week when James breaks down the game between the Bears and the Packers. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, our Spotlight Politics team examines President Trump's unexpected criticism of the COVID relief bill and what comes next. Preparing for college during a pandemic, what high school students may be facing while applying for higher education this year. And SNL characters and late-night TV hosts, a new book examines satire in history and politics. But first, some more of today's top stories. Pfizer announces today it will supply the U.S. government with an additional 100 million doses of its COVID-19 vaccine. This will bring its total current commitment to 200 million doses for the U.S., which should be enough to vaccinate 100 million people with 2 shots. Johnny's Ice House East on the Near West Side is up for sale, and the owner says that they're hoping to find a buyer to scrap the rink. This rink isn't to be confused with the old official practice spot of the Chicago Blackhawks. That was Johnny's Ice House West, and that's a bit further down Madison than Johnny's Ice House East. This sale comes after years of property value increases in the West Loop and also 3 years after the Blackhawks debut their own practice facility, Fifth Third Arena, just to the south of the United Center. And now we go to Brandis Friedman and changes in higher education due to the pandemic in a conversation that first aired on our Sunday program, Chicago Tonight, Black Voices.
In any year, applying for college can be a stressful time for high school students. But like so many other things this year, the pandemic has made the application process even more uncertain and difficult. While colleges grapple with how to evaluate applicants, financially disadvantaged students are struggling to figure out how to even afford college in a devastated economy. That struggle is reflected in the numbers from a recent report that shows undergrad enrollment dropped by 3.6% this year, continuing a larger downward trend, particularly among Black students. Joining us now with more are Jeffrey Beckham Jr., interim CEO of Chicago Scholars Foundation, a college access and development program for students from under-resourced communities, and Kyle Westbrook, Executive Director of Partnership for College Completion, which works to ensure students in the Chicago area graduate from college. Gentlemen, welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, and thanks for joining us. Jeffrey, let's start with you, please. What are you hearing from students and families about this year's college application process?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. So we're hearing that, our students who are first generation and from low-income communities are know that this has always been a challenge. That's why Chicago Scholars exists. We're trying to support these students to get through college and to graduate and become leaders in their professional lives. The dual pandemics of both the COVID-19 pandemic and systematic racism in the city has led to students having what has already been a challenging process to even be that much more challenging. And so, even in a year where everything has been different, our students are still working and committed to achieving and persevering.
Kyle, what are some of the changes that colleges and universities are making with regard to their admissions requirements because of COVID, particularly around standardized testing?
Sure. Even before the pandemic, there was a growing movement of colleges and universities around the country and here in Illinois who were going to what is called either test optional or test blind admissions. And that is in test optional institutions, you have colleges who are saying students can submit those tests, but they're not required to. And then increasingly at places like Northern Illinois University, Southern Illinois University of Carbondale, those institutions have actually gone test blind. And that is, they don't even want to see those tests because we know all the research suggests that those tests don't actually predict much about students' ability to be successful in college. But what they really measure is a student's family income more than anything. And so you see increasingly colleges were, even before the pandemic, moving away from those tests. And then now with the pandemic and the fact that ACT, SAT has been suspended and they've tried to have tests, it's been inconsistent all over the country, that you see even more colleges and universities embracing test optional or test blind approaches.
And Jeffrey, if college enrollment was already on the decline, what effect might COVID-19 have on enrollment numbers for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, right now, unfortunately, colleges are still trying to figure it out. The enrollment numbers and as well as their budgets are being impacted greatly. So the amount of merit aid, the money going to the students directly, is still very much so up in the air. And that's because of that, we're actually advising our students to look for external scholarships.
And Kyle, are community colleges, might they see an increase as, the typical college experience is likely off the table for a number of students?
Yeah, there's a couple of things at play. Typically, during economic downturns, you do see actual community college enrollment go up. But the National Student Clearinghouse just released data a few weeks ago that said that actually community college enrollment has actually declined the most during the pandemic. And it shouldn't surprise us when we consider that most often community college students are most financially vulnerable, that the most financially vulnerable students would be less likely to enroll in college fresh out or right off high school.
And Jeffrey, how would you describe the effect that we're seeing of all of this on Black and brown students particularly? Obviously, Chicago Scholars works with largely Black and brown students.
Yeah, definitely. They're being adversely impacted. When you think about the dual pandemics, and I always say this, is that when the world catches a cold, the Black and brown communities catch a flu. And unfortunately, this time it's been COVID-19. Our students have been adversely impacted from the amount of funding that goes to them from a merit perspective. They're not being notified because schools' budgets are cut. And, again, just the ability even to have counsel or individuals to help them test or take the ACT and SAT has largely impacted students, which is why so many of the students weren't able to take it or they didn't do as well on those tests. And so, we're really working with colleges and advising them to look at the whole student, as Kyle mentioned earlier.
And, to that point, Kyle, what changes should admissions changes, what of those should colleges and universities be considering to ensure that Black and brown students aren't further disproportionately impacted?
Yeah, I think the movement towards test optional and test blind, and frankly, we would say test blind admissions needs to be accelerated. And, as Jeffrey mentioned, sort of looking at the whole student, and that includes their GPA, their high school transcript, that includes their extracurricular activities, their service, and in many cases, especially for Black students, they've held down part-time jobs and, and at the same time been able to successfully manage their academic life as well as their work life and their family life. And that should tell a college university a lot about that student's ability to be successful and juggle the multiple priorities that they will experience in college.
We've talked about admissions, but also what about persisting in college, Kyle? What changes should universities be making to ensure that Black and brown students can continue to persist? They may not have sort of a safety net at home.
That's right. the biggest, one of the biggest challenges we see is really the wealth gap that exists between Black students and white students. So it's not necessarily just family income, it's wealth. And that's the ability for family and the student to weather some of the economic crises that might come up. And so what we see and what we are certainly pushing not only our college and universities, but also our legislature, and that is to fund emergency grants on campuses. And knowing that, of course, every dollar is tight these days, but prioritizing these small kind of micro grants that often make the difference between a low-income student's ability to actually persist in college.
My thanks to Jeffrey Beckham and Kyle Westbrook. Thanks to you both and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
These are no doubt intense and fraught political times, and that means political satire has taken on an important new role. Satirists challenge, critique, and confront society through their work. That's according to a new book called The Sanity of Satire, Surviving Politics One Joke at a Time, written by our friend Al Genie and Abraham Singer. And the authors delve into the history of satire and how entertainers use comical observations to highlight absurdities and injustices in the world. Joining us to discuss the impact of past and present political satire is the book's co-author, Al Genie, a retired business ethics professor at Loyola University. Al, great to see you.
It's a pleasure to be seen.
All right, Al, so the central question right now, how does one produce political satire when truth in the Trump era here is often much stranger than fiction?
Lewis Black said that he's given enough comedy because he says, what's the sense of being a comic sitting there hours and hours and hours trying to put together a political joke or a joke at all when all you have to do is open the papers, as Will Rogers referred to more than 50 years ago. I don't have to write anything. I just pick up the papers and talk about it later. And I think that that's been an interesting phenomenon. In fact, if we talk about present day media, think of all the major comedians out there, starting with, of course, Jon Stewart, and the late night shows. They're all political commentary shows. Okay, Jimmy does one or two jokes and then goes on with other things, and maybe even the Channel 5 one does something else. What's his name on NBC? But on CBS, what is it? It's
Colbert.
all satire all night long on whatever the day's events are. And I think it shows up the difference because there's a very close difference between comedy and satire. Comedy is this attempt to entertain, maybe even to keep us busy for a while, to overcome our fears about something, to give us some relief. But satire, whether it's mild, rude, crude, or vulgar, is really a statement. It's really trying to catch your attention. It's really trying to say something so that you're aware of it and so we could possibly change it. Abe Singer and I call satirists really militant contrarians. They tell a joke, but the joke is larger, deeper, and more important than the joke itself. It wants to change the world. Although I almost saw him once, Lenny Bruce, at the Golden Horn many, many years ago when he was working in Chicago. He got arrested just before he came on air. He said, "I'm not a comedian. I'm a satirist. I'm trying to change the world. Well, I'm not always funny."
I think, Al, that was the title of that one-man show. I'm not a comedian. I'm Lenny Bruce. Let's talk about one of the sort of core satire programs of our time, Saturday Night Live, and how they have satirized the current era. Let's take a look at a clip.
And in just a couple of weeks, if you vote for me, the vaccine will be here and will be distributed by the military.
I'm sorry, you said the military will distribute the vaccine?
That's right. The Army will come and shoot it with a cannon into your face.
All right, that's featuring Alec Baldwin in his portrayal of Trump. Al Genie, you mentioned that these comedy shows used to be down the middle. They do, a Democratic joke, a Republican joke, but it was never, it never really cut to the core of policy. How has this change impacted culture?
Well, if you look at Saturday Night Live, from Chevy Chase on when he was making fun of Jerry Ford, they always had a male member of the cast imitate or mock or make fun of the president. It's kind of a running routine. But Saturday Night Live was really a cultural show. It was about the media. They were talking about, and the bands and the time, what was going on. It wasn't a political show. Now it's almost all politics. And the reality is, as Lewis Black suggested, that what's funnier than some of these faux pas that we see in the paper and some of these actions we see in the paper when we're looking at it. And I think satire has become much more important, though. I think we need to listen to these clearing calls. And let me talk about somebody who bridges it. Mel Brooks, who is my favorite comic from my generation and my uncle's favorite comic. And I grew up watching his films. But in The Producer, which was this outrageous film, it wasn't just about entertainment. In fact, in an interview 2 years ago, Brooks said, it was funny. I wanted it to be funny. I wanted it to be funny by Blazing Saddles. But it was satire because my point was we won and you're dead.
Right.
And we should never let that happen again.
So the underlying message here in Blazing Saddles, which a lot of us just laughed at the jokes. You talk about the history of political satire, going back to the very beginning. I'm assuming a caveman drew a picture on a cave wall of the other caveman's fire. Talk about the origins here.
Well, my co-author, Abraham Singer, who is, I am just his lackey in comparison to the politics, as he pointed out two things. Aristotle in the Western world was really the one that said that human beings are political animals. And it is in politics that we first begin to talk to each other and understand each other. And so we needed satire, we needed comedy to make light of that which we were living through. And so that's where it first came up. And Abe found an Assyrian joke, a Middle Eastern joke from over 2,000 years ago about a wife and his relationship with her husband, which was really not funny, but clearly satire. And I think insofar as we live together, besides the usual flatus jokes and sex jokes, so on and so forth, when we talk about relationships, that's really an attempt to change it. Even many marriage jokes, you can divide jokes. You know, if you look at this new book by Jerry Seinfeld, he put together his jokes from his whole career. Some of them are just jokes, some of them are word plays, and some of them are burning satire about how we live and how we act with others. And satire is really this attempt to talk about, and that's what politics is, the polis, the individuals within a state interacting with each other. And real satirists try to change it.
So philosophy and comedy here. Once again, the book is called The Sanity of Satire, Surviving Politics, One Joke at a Time. And our thanks to our good friend Al Genie for joining us. Thanks, Al.
My pleasure.
President Trump unexpectedly vetoes the bipartisan defense bill and threatens to do the same for the COVID relief and government funding package. And the fallout continues from the Chicago police raid on the wrong woman's house. Here with all that is our Spotlight Politics team of Amanda Vinicky and Heather Sharon. Great to see both of you. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all of that stuff. Heather, there's so much going on today in national politics. A lot of pardons. Let's put up a graphic showing some of the pardons that the president put out last night. And then in the last hour and a half or so, there have been more pardons. Talk about some of the Chicago connections here.
Well, Chicago and George Papadopoulos, who was one of the people charged and then convicted as part of the Mueller investigation into Russian collusion with the Trump administration during the 2016 election, he was pardoned, as well as a major nursing home operator who was charged with fraud. Trump also pardoned him. And then tonight on the national stage, we learned that the president had pardoned Roger Stone, who was also convicted as part of the Mueller investigation, as well as Paul Manafort, who was, of course, the president's campaign chairman and chief during the 2016 campaign. However, it's not clear. This was day 2 of a massive wave of pardons. It's not clear whether they will stop anytime soon. Donald Trump has 26 more days in office.
All right, so much happening, a lot of controversy.
If we forgot there, of course, Jared Kushner's dad, too.
Well, that just happened to, Jared Kushner's dad. Well, Amanda, all right, so on the pardon thing, a lot of folks that Heather mentioned that, were convicted of lying to the FBI, ostensibly falling on the sword here in the Russia investigation for President Trump. Is there a political fallout here for Republicans, for Democrats, or for the country?
Yes, there is certainly fallout. I think that the president has been talking about this. A slew of pardons was expected. As I think Heather indicated, this may well not be the end of the pardons that he is going to issue. And certainly this is yet again a continuation of norm busting, what that means for the presidency going forward, what that means for just the culture of Congress. There really hasn't at this point been still any sort of backlash on President Trump by members of the Republican Party, even as he lost the election whether or not he's going to admit that. So, yes, there's certainly, I think, consequences for the country, for Congress, but not necessarily political punishment on Republicans, unless we'll have to see how this plays in the state of Georgia. I'm guessing the stimulus bill is going to be a bigger deal for voters there.
Consequences maybe for law and order, the perceptions of the justice system. A lot of legal observers saying that this is an abuse of the pardon power, although we should mention presidents have issued controversial pardons in the past for people that were connected to them, that did them favors. This seems to be on a bigger scale right now. Let's move on to the other surprising news last night. President Trump surprised lawmakers and Americans in need of help on that government COVID relief bill. He threatened to veto it. Here's what he said.
I'm also asking Congress to immediately get rid of the wasteful and unnecessary items from this legislation, and to send me a suitable bill, or else the next administration will have to deliver a COVID relief package, and maybe that administration will be me.
So Heather, you see reports today of a lot of Republicans angry at this action because they had spent a lot of time negotiating this deal. And then you see Democratic leaders say, hey, the president wants $2,000 in everyone's pocket. That's what we want. Let's go do it. What's the political fallout of this?
Well, it's not clear yet. So months ago, the democratically controlled House of Representatives passed a $3 trillion stimulus bill that included $2,000 checks. However, it was the GOP-controlled Senate that said, hold on, that's too much money. So now the Democrats are saying, hey, wait, if we all agree on $2,000 checks, let's get it done. So there will be a special Christmas Eve session of the House of Representatives tomorrow, where Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, will try to move those $2,000 checks with something called unanimous consent. It's essentially where everybody agrees and nobody objects, so it moves forward. That is unlikely to happen because despite the president's call, Republicans still don't support $2,000 checks. Where that leaves this relief bill is in limbo. The president hasn't explicitly said that he's going to veto it. Nobody seems really sure what will happen. However, if it does not get signed soon, there will be millions of people across America who won't get those at least $600 relief checks, as well as expanded unemployment insurance and rental protections will expire on January 1st.
All right, let's move on to the local news of this week. The fallout continues around the wrongful raid on Anjanette Young. Let's take a look at what the mayor had to say, along with Alderman Leslie Hairston.
Trust has been breached. Trust in our city, trust in me. And that is a trust which I understand and will win back.
No more talk about reform. It's time for action, and bold action.
All right, Mayor, there has been action. The head of the Corporation Council, plus a few other folks in the law department, they have lost their jobs. The mayor announces bringing in a private investigator to analyze, investigate this entire response to this. Is that enough, do you think, to quell some of this outcry, or will there have to be more?
Oh, there certainly is going to be need for more. There are very much calls for the police officers involved to be punished, fired even. I think that Mayor Lightfoot needs to continue to have conversations with community members because trust really is at the foundation of this. In part, you have calls to say this is institutional failures, but I'm not sure how to fix this because so much of this is just going back to humanity. For example, frustration that this wasn't even after this botched raid, that it wasn't run up the flagpole, that the officers didn't talk to their supervisors about what all went wrong. Again, you see that video and you have to say, just be a human being. It's clearly, she doesn't have a gun on her. She's not wearing any clothes. Get this woman some clothing, a blanket, a towel, anything. And so I think, no, you are going to have to see systemic changes, and Lori Lightfoot is going to have to continue to be very upfront with voters, with aldermen, and with constituencies who are really, really upset.
And Heather, we should note again that the raid actually happened before Lightfoot took office, but it's the things that happened since that have cast a harsh light on the Lightfoot administration. Mark Flessner, the Corporation Counsel, he is out, although he said that it wasn't necessarily his idea to go to court to try and block the release of that video to CBS 2. So what do you know about where the buck actually stops here? Who was making the decisions to halt FOIA requests and to halt the release of that video?
Well, those are the crucial questions, which is part of the reason why Mayor Lori Lightfoot tapped retired Judge Ann Williams to conduct an outside probe. She is a trailblazer who was first nominated to the federal bench by President Ronald Reagan and then elevated to the U.S. Appellate Court by President Bill Clinton. So she is going to take a holistic look at what happened. There are also calls for Inspector General Joe Ferguson to take a look at the probe. He has not said whether he will launch a probe or not. However, I think Amanda's right. This is something that is not going to go away over the holidays. This will be back in full force as aldermen and city officials confront the fact that there seems to be continued and systemic problems in the police department with accountability and misconduct, as well as the city's ability to police the police.
Amanda, we only have a few seconds left, but quickly tell us what happened to those 12 officers involved in that raid.
Right now, they are on desk duty. The COPA investigation continues. COPA, by the way, saying they don't have enough money to be able to carry out all of these investigations in a timely fashion, particularly after so many complaints in the fallout of George Floyd and all those protests. So right now, dozen officers put on desk duty instead of on the streets.
All right, Amanda and Heather, enjoy your holidays. Enjoy Christmas Eve, Christmas. Hope Santa is good to both of you, and see you soon.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing, and you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. An effort to clean up the Great Lakes gets an extension. We'll have all the details on that. And a high school student's quest to see more bird species in Cook County than anyone ever. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible in part by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.